Hi, I'm Kayla Morgan. I'm 24 years old, and I come from a quiet street in Cincinnati, Ohio, where the lawns are neat and the family secrets are even neater. My story isn't about a big, dramatic explosion. It's about the slow, silent burn of being forgotten, the kind of hurt that doesn't leave a bruise but reshapes the bone. My parents paid every cent for my sister's private college, but told me I should learn the value of hard work. It was one of the many clean, simple lines they used to draw a circle around her, leaving me on the outside. They bought her a future, gift-wrapped and shiny, and they handed me a bill for mine, so I worked. I worked until my hands were raw from dishwater, and my mind was numb from exhaustion. I built a life for myself in the shadows of their neglect, brick by painful brick, and for 4 years they never once looked my way. They never saw the struggle, the fear, the sheer force of will it took just to keep going, so they never expected the success. They simply weren't paying attention. That's why, 4 years later, they sat so proudly in the front row of my university graduation. They were there for the photo opportunity, to tick a box that said they'd raised 2 successful daughters. They smiled and waved as I walked toward the stage, their faces beaming with a generic, unearned pride. They were still smiling when the dean called my name for the diploma. Then he called it again. An announcement was made. A video played on the giant screens, broadcasting my secret life to thousands of people, and in an instant, the entire stadium turned to look at them. The smiles fell from their faces. The performative pride evaporated, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. Because what I revealed that day wasn't a secret I had kept from them. It was the truth they had chosen not to see, and it changed everything they thought they knew about me. This is the story of how I stopped waiting for their approval and started building my own worth. This is how I learned to be my own son. Being the other child doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow erosion of worth, a quiet lesson taught over thousands of small moments that, alone, seem trivial, but together, build a wall. In my family, I was the sensible one, the quiet one, the low-maintenance one. My younger sister, Jessica, was the golden one. She was the sun, and I was just a planet caught in her orbit, expected to circle her silently and reflect her light. Our parents, Lori and Don Morgan, weren't cruel people in the way you see in movies. They never locked me in a closet or told me they hated me. Their neglect was softer, more insidious. It was a neglect of attention, of investment, of belief. They loved me, I suppose, in the way you love a reliable old chair. I was functional. I was there. I never broke, but I didn't excite them. Jessica. She was the new sports car they couldn't wait to show off at every opportunity. The pattern was set so early, I can barely remember a time before it. I think of our birthdays, 2 months apart. For my 10th birthday, we had a small family dinner at home. My mom made my favorite pasta, and my dad brought home a chocolate cake from the grocery store. I got one present, a beautiful, leather-bound set of encyclopedias because I loved to read. "Kayla's so serious," Dad said with a fond chuckle, patting my head as I traced the gold lettering on the spine. "Our little scholar." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like a label, a neat and tidy box to keep me in. After cake, I went to my room and spent the rest of the night looking up animals in the A volume, the quietness of the house a familiar blanket. 2 months later, for Jessica's 8th birthday, the house transformed. The backyard became a carnival. They rented a bouncy castle that towered over our fence, and a pony that gave rides to a swarm of squealing children. My mom, who had seemed tired the night of my birthday, was a whirlwind of energy, coordinating games and handing out treat bags. The centerpiece gift was a brand new pink bicycle with glittery tassels on the handlebars and a white basket on the front. My dad held it up like a trophy before setting her on the seat. He ran alongside her down the street, cheering and clapping as all the other parents watched and smiled. I stood on the porch, holding a slice of her much bigger, professionally decorated cake, and watched them go. The message was clear, written in frosting and glitter. My interests were quiet and cheap. Hers were loud and worth celebrating. As we grew into teenagers, this dynamic solidified into family law. Jessica was bubbly and popular, a natural star who became captain of the cheerleading squad. Her victories were public and easy to understand. Every trophy she brought home was placed on the mantelpiece, pushing my smaller academic awards to the side. Every school event she starred in was a command performance for our parents. They drove her to practice, paid for expensive uniforms, and sat in the bleachers for hours, their faces beaming with a pride that was almost aggressive. I was a quiet achiever. My successes were printed on paper, report cards, honor roll certificates, a byline in the school newspaper. In 10th grade, I won second place in the state science fair. My project was a complex, working model of a low-cost water purification system, something I had spent 6 months perfecting in our garage. I was so excited I could barely breathe. I called my mom from a payphone at the convention center. "Mom, I got it! I got second place!" I yelled into the receiver. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," she said, but her voice was distracted. I could hear the television in the background. "Listen, I can't talk long. I have to run out and pick up Jessica's new cheer uniform. They got the sizing wrong again. We'll celebrate when you get home." The celebration consisted of a "That's my girl" from my dad as he passed me in the hallway. The trophy was small and plastic. I put it on my desk in my room, where it gathered dust. It felt less like a prize and more like a secret. The real chasm opened when it came to college. For Jessica, it was a foregone conclusion that she would go to a top-tier private university. Her entire junior year was a whirlwind of focused, expensive parental activity. They hired an SAT tutor for $100 an hour who came to the house twice a week. My dad spent weekends driving Jessica on campus tours up and down the East Coast, from Boston to Virginia. They spread glossy brochures for Ivy League schools across the dining room table like treasure maps, plotting out her golden future. My mom spent hours helping her craft her application essays, polishing every sentence until it shone. The cost, which ran into the tens of thousands, was never mentioned as an obstacle. "It's an investment," they'd say to anyone who asked, "in our daughter's potential." My potential was apparently a do-it-yourself project. When I started my own college search, the grand maps on the dining table were gone, replaced by bills and catalogs. When I brought home a brochure for Ohio State, a great in-state university I was genuinely excited about, my dad glanced at it. Over his newspaper. "That's nice, Kayla," he said, his eyes not leaving the page. "That's a big place. Have you thought about community college? It's a great way to save money and figure out what you really want to do." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "We don't want to spend this kind of money on you." I tried to fight for it. One evening, I came to them with a spreadsheet. I had calculated the costs for Ohio State, tuition, fees, books. I showed them my projected earnings from a part-time job and how student loans could cover the rest. I was trying to show them I was serious, that I was responsible. My dad looked at my neat columns of numbers and sighed. "It's not just about the money, Kayla," he said, his tone patient, as if explaining something to a child. "It's about what's a good fit. We just don't see you at a big university like that. You've always been a homebody." The conversation I dreaded finally happened one Sunday evening in April. I had just gotten my acceptance letter from Ohio State, along with a modest academic scholarship that would barely cover the cost of books. I was thrilled, my heart pounding with pride that I had gotten in on my own merit. I brought the letter into the living room where my parents were watching a movie. "I got in," I said, my voice trembling slightly with a hope I couldn't crush. "I got into Ohio State." My mom turned to me, a polite, distant smile on her face. "Oh, honey, that's fantastic." My dad muted the TV. "Well, congratulations, Kayla. That's a good school." He cleared his throat, the sound signaling the bad news that was about to come. "Now you know things are tight. We've put a lot aside for Jessica's education, and those private schools aren't cheap." "I got a scholarship," I offered meekly, holding up the letter as if it were a shield. "That's great," he said, nodding slowly. "Every little bit helps, but you'll need to figure out the rest. Student loans, a part-time job. It'll be a good experience for you. Teach you the value of hard work. The value of hard work." The phrase echoed in my head, bitter and metallic, as if I hadn't been working hard my entire life, as if my straight A's and my science fair trophy were hobbies. The message wasn't about hard work. It was about my perceived worth. Jessica was the investment. I was the expense they were trying to cut. Later that night, unable to sleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. I stopped in the dark hallway when I heard their voices coming from the kitchen. "She'll be fine, Dawn," my mom said, her voice low and certain. "Kayla's always been so independent. She lands on her feet. She's not like Jessie." "I know," my dad sighed, and his next words were the ones that would be etched into my soul forever. "It's just, Jessica needs that support system. She thrives on it. Kayla's not really college material in that same way. She's more of a grinder. She'll find her own way. Not really college material. I stood there, my hand gripping the doorframe, the words piercing me like tiny shards of glass. It wasn't that they thought I was stupid. It was that they thought I wasn't special enough to deserve their help. My independence wasn't a trait they admired. It was a convenience they exploited to justify their neglect. That night, I didn't cry. Crying felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, a cold, hard certainty settled in my chest. I was on my own, and if I was going to prove them wrong, I would have to do it by myself, in silence. The double standard wasn't just about a pink bicycle versus a set of books anymore. It was about my entire future. They had drawn the line, and I knew, with absolute clarity, which side I was on. Part 2. Heavy victimization. The deep cut. The summer I turned 18 was the summer the invisible line between my sister and me was drawn in permanent ink. It was the summer of our high school graduations, events that served as perfect, painful bookends to our upbringing. Jessica's was first, in late May. The week leading up to it was a Category 5 hurricane of activity and emotion. My mom took her shopping for the perfect white dress, an expedition that involved multiple trips to multiple malls. My dad got both family cars washed and detailed. A stream of relatives from out of state began to arrive, filling the guest rooms, their arms laden with gifts for Jessica. The house buzzed with an energy that was entirely, exclusively focused on her. On the morning of her graduation, the house was a flurry of motion. I was tasked with making coffee and setting out breakfast for the relatives while Jessica spent 2 hours in the bathroom, getting ready with her friends. I remember overhearing my aunt tell my mother, "Lori, you've done such a wonderful job with her. She's going to take the world by storm." I stood in the kitchen, invisible, pouring orange juice into glasses. The ceremony itself was a production. My parents sat in the front row, my dad with a camcorder glued to his eye, my mom dabbing at her proud tears with an embroidered tissue. When Jessica's name was called, they erupted in cheers, their applause echoing through the packed auditorium. They had a dozen long-stemmed roses waiting for her. Afterward, we had a huge party back at our house. The backyard was filled with white balloons and tables laden with catered food. Dozens of people milled about, their laughter mixing with the pop music playing from a speaker. Everyone's attention was on Jessica, who floated through the crowd, accepting congratulations and pressing thick envelopes of cash into a special bag my mom had given her. The centerpiece of the entire event, the grand finale, was the gift from our parents. My dad gathered everyone in a circle on the driveway, clinking a glass for attention. "Jessica, your mother and I are so incredibly proud of you," he began, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard him use when talking about me. "You have brought so much joy and light into our lives, and you have such a brilliant future ahead of you. To help you on your next big adventure, we wanted to give you something to make the journey a little easier, a little safer." He then pulled a small, elegantly wrapped box from his pocket. Jessica tore it open, her eyes wide with practiced surprise. Inside was a set of car keys. She gasped theatrically. My dad pointed to the street, where a brand-new cherry-red sedan was parked, a giant white bow tied around its roof. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement of her value. Jessica screamed with delight and threw her arms around our parents. There were more tears, more pictures, more applause. The car represented more than just transportation. It was a tangible, expensive promise of their unwavering support, a public declaration of her worth. My graduation was 2 weeks later. The contrast was stark. It was a quiet, overcast Tuesday. No relatives flew in. They had all gone home after Jessica's party. My parents attended, of course, sitting somewhere in the middle of the bleachers. I spotted them as I walked in with my class. They looked bored. My dad gave a perfunctory wave. They clapped politely when my name was called. There was no party afterward. The house was quiet when we got back. We just went out for a quiet dinner at a local Olive Garden. The conversation over breadsticks was stilted and awkward. They asked if I was nervous about college. They talked about the traffic on the way to the restaurant. They talked about Jessica's plans to decorate her dorm room. My own achievement felt like a small, smooth stone dropped into a vast ocean, disappearing without a ripple. Later that evening, back at home in the quiet living room, my mom handed me a small, generic gift bag, the kind you buy in a pack of 3 at the drugstore. "This is for you, sweetie," she said with a warm but distracted smile. "Congratulations." Inside the bag was a new backpack for college. It was a sturdy, practical black backpack from a sensible brand. It was a good backpack, the kind that would last. Tucked into the front pocket was a Hallmark card. I opened it. In my mom's neat cursive, it read, "Congratulations on your graduation, Kayla. We're so proud of you. Love, Mom." And Dad. There was no money inside. I looked up from the card, the backpack feeling impossibly heavy and simultaneously hollow in my hands. I thought of Jessica's shiny red car, the emotional speech, the tears of joy from our parents. I looked at the sensible backpack and the simple, generic card. The contrast was so stark, so brutal. It literally took my breath away. I felt a tightening in my chest, a physical ache. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. My dad patted my shoulder, his touch light and dismissive. "You've always been more independent, Kayla," he said, using their favorite excuse, the one that absolved them of everything. "You don't need as much help." That was their story, and they were sticking to it. My competence was my curse. Because I could handle things I was expected to. Because I didn't demand their attention, I didn't receive it. I wasn't being rewarded for my independence. I was being punished for it. They weren't fostering my strength. They were outsourcing their parental responsibility to it. I weighed the backpack in my hand and thought of the heft of a set of car keys. The difference felt like the weight of their love. That night, the cut went deep. It wasn't about the car or the money. It was about the gesture. It was about the public declaration of Jessica's worth and the quiet, private, almost reluctant acknowledgement of mine. The world had to see how much they valued her. My value was a private matter, to be handled with a practical gift and a few simple words in a card. I took the backpack up to my room and set it on my bed. It sat there, black and unassuming, a symbol of my solitary future. I thought about the thousands of dollars they had spent on Jessica's car, her party, her future. And for me, a $50 backpack. The disparity wasn't just financial, it was emotional. It was a clear, calculated measurement of my place in the family. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the backpack against the wall until it ripped apart. I wanted to run downstairs and demand to know why. Why is she worth a car, and I am only worth a bag to carry my own burdens in? Why was her future a celebration, and mine Footnote, but I did none of those things. I was the quiet one after all, the independent one. So I just sat there on my bed, staring at the black backpack, and felt a profound sense of loneliness wash over me. It was the kind of loneliness that comes from being in a crowded room, or a full house, and realizing that no one truly sees you. The cut wasn't just deep, it was clean. It severed the last thread of childish hope I had that they might one day see me as an equal to my sister. It was the moment I truly understood that my path was not just separate from theirs, but one I would have to walk entirely alone. The backpack wasn't a gift. It was a message. It said, "Go on then. Carry it all yourself." And so, I knew I would. That first day of college felt less like a beginning and more like a continuation of the lonely path I was already on. While Jessica was posting photos on social media of her new dorm room, a coordinated collection of pink and gray bedding, fairy lights, and posters my mom had spent a month curating, I was standing at a bus stop at dawn, figuring out the city's transit schedule. My campus was a 2-hour commute from home, a journey I'd have to make twice a day, every day. The sensible black backpack my parents had given me felt heavy on my shoulders, filled with secondhand textbooks I'd bought online, their pages already marked up by previous owners. My life quickly fell into a grueling, relentless routine that left no room for anything but work and exhaustion. My alarm went off at 5 a.m. in the cold darkness. I'd catch the 6:15 a.m. bus, using the shaky, jolting ride to do my first round of reading for my classes, highlighting passages with a pen that often skittered across the page. I had an 8:00 a.m. lecture, followed by a full day of classes that left my brain feeling stretched and sore. My first part-time job started at 3 p.m. I would rush to the back of a greasy campus diner called the Greasy Spoon, a name that was painfully accurate. I was a dishwasher. For 4 hours, I stood in a hot, steamy corner, scraping half-eaten food into a bin and wrestling with heavy, slippery plates. The smell of stale beer, old grease, and bleach clung to my clothes and hair. My boss, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, would shout orders over the din of the kitchen. The only bright spot was a fellow dishwasher, a kind older woman named Maria, who would sometimes slip me a leftover burger and tell me to keep my chin up. At 7:00 p.m., my shift ended, and I would rush to the library for my second job. There, I would reshelve books in the quiet, dusty stacks until the library closed at 10 p.m. The silence was a welcome relief after the chaos of the diner kitchen. I loved the smell of old paper and the feeling of order as I put books back in their rightful place. But it was still work, and my feet ached from being on them for 7 straight hours. My third job was on weekends, a 12-hour retail shift at a department store in the mall, folding sweaters and dealing with rude customers. I was perpetually bone-deeply exhausted. The bus ride home was a blur of smeared city lights and the low hum of the engine. I'd often fall asleep, my head against the cold glass of the window, and wake up with a jolt, panicked that I had missed my stop. I'd get home after midnight, eat a bowl of cereal for dinner because I was too tired to cook, and then try to study for another hour or two before collapsing into bed, my mind buzzing with facts about political science and my body screaming in protest. Sophomore year, I almost dropped out. The cost of tuition had gone up by 5%, a small amount that felt like a mountain to me. I was living on instant noodles and free coffee from the student lounge. One week, I had to choose between buying a required textbook and paying my car insurance. I chose the insurance. A few days later, I failed a midterm exam because I hadn't done the reading, and I'd fallen asleep while trying to cram the night before. I remember getting the test back with a big red F circled at the top. It felt like a brand. I walked out of the lecture hall and went to my car, a rusty 20-year-old sedan I'd bought for $500 from a junkyard. I sat in the driver's seat in the vast, empty community college parking lot where I paid to park each day, and I cried. Not quiet tears, but big, ugly, gulping sobs that shook my entire body. I looked at the F on the paper, and I thought about the dismissive look on my dad's face when he'd said, "Community college might be better anyway." The thought of giving up, of admitting they were right that I wasn't college material, was a physical pain in my chest. The sheer weight of it all, the commute, the jobs, the endless pressure, was crushing me. I seriously considered just driving home and never coming back. What stopped me was the memory of my dad's words. A spark of anger, hot and fierce, cut through the despair. "I'll show you," I thought. "I'll show all of you." Somehow I pulled myself back from the brink. I went to the professor whose midterm I'd failed, my paper crumpled in my hand, and I explained my situation. He was surprisingly understanding and let me write a long essay for extra credit. I started sleeping 1 hour less per night, pushing my bedtime from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. to make more time for studying. I found a cheaper place to buy textbooks. I kept going, fueled by a stubborn, angry refusal to fail, and through it all, I clawed my way back to a 3.9 GPA, but the silence from home was deafening. My family never once visited me on campus. They never asked to see the library where I worked or the lecture hall where I was learning. My mom would call sometimes, but the conversations were always painfully superficial. "How are things, sweetie?" she'd ask brightly. "They're good, Mom. Busy. My classes are really challenging," I'd say, leaving a space, a small opening for her to ask for details. The opening was never used. "Oh, that's nice. Well, your sister just loves her sorority. They're having a big formal next month and she's going to Europe for spring break with her friends. Can you believe it? Paris. We're so excited for her." The conversation would inevitably turn into a monologue about Jessica's vibrant, exciting college life, fully funded by them. I would stand in my cramped room, phone pressed to my ear, and listen to the details of her carefree existence. My own reality felt like a gray, colorless world compared to her sun-drenched one. I never told them about the 3 jobs. I never told them about the exhaustion or the F on my midterm. I knew instinctively that they wouldn't understand. It would just be more proof that I was struggling, that their decision to not invest in me was the right one. My struggle was my secret, my shame. The most painful moments always came during holidays. I remember Thanksgiving of my junior year. I took the bus home, dreaming of a home-cooked meal and a warm bed. The house was filled with the smell of turkey and the sound of laughter. Jessica was holding court at the dinner table, regaling everyone with stories about her semester studying abroad in Spain. "The architecture in Barcelona is just breathtaking," she said, her hands gesturing grandly. "And the nightlife is insane. We went to this club in Ibiza. Honestly, everyone should just travel. It's so easy to do when you're young." My parents hung on her every word, their faces glowing with vicarious pride. "Oh, that sounds wonderful." "Jessie," my dad said, We're so glad you're having these experiences. I sat there, picking at the turkey on my plate, feeling like a ghost at my own family's table. I had experiences too. They were just different. They were about learning the precise weight of a stack of dinner plates, about the quiet satisfaction of finding a misplaced book in the library, about the thrill of understanding a complex legal theory at 2 a.m., trying to connect, to be seen. I mentioned a small victory of my own into a lull in the conversation. I won a departmental award for an essay I wrote last month, I said, my voice sounding small. It came with a $500 scholarship. My mom turned to me and smiled that same polite, distant smile. That's great, sweetie, she said, her eyes already drifting back to Jessica, who was now showing photos on her phone. Then my mom turned to me fully, her mind clearly on her hosting duties. The plates are piling up. Can you give me a hand with the dishes? Jessica didn't even look up from her phone, and just like that, I was dismissed. My hard-won achievement, the product of countless sleepless nights, was worth less than a passing comment before I was sent back to my domestic duty. I stood at the kitchen sink, my hands in hot, soapy water, scrubbing gravy off the good china. I could hear the happy chatter from the dining room, my dad laughing at one of Jessica's stories. In that moment, the water running over my hands, I felt an indescribable loneliness. It wasn't just that they didn't care about my achievements, it was that they didn't even have the curiosity to ask. My life, my struggles, my triumphs, they were all invisible to them. I was just the reliable daughter who would always be there to help with the dishes, and they were the proud parents of the golden child who traveled the world. The turning point of my life didn't come with a lightning bolt or a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, in a stuffy, overcrowded lecture hall during the first semester of my junior year. The class was Modern Political Theory, taught by a professor named Dr. Alistair Weiss. He was a campus legend, brilliant, with a reputation for being intimidatingly tough but profoundly fair. He didn't just teach facts. He taught you how to think, how to dismantle an argument and build it back up stronger. I was, as usual, a ghost in his class. I sat in the back corner, never raising my hand, never speaking a word. The thought of drawing attention to myself in a room full of confident, articulate students was terrifying. But I did the reading. I did all of it, twice. I lived inside those books. I poured everything I had, all my silent observations about fairness and power, into my papers. I wrote about John Rawls's theory of justice, not as an academic concept, but as something I felt in my bones. I wrote about structural inequality, about the invisible systems that lift some people up and hold others down, using the language of political philosophy to articulate the quiet injustices of my own life, without ever saying so. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, an email from Dr. Weiss appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simply, meeting. My blood ran cold. The email was short and to the point. Kayla, please see me during my office hours tomorrow. AW. My stomach twisted into a knot of pure anxiety. I was sure I was in some kind of trouble. Had he caught a citation error? Did he think I had plagiarized something? The most terrifying thought was that he'd seen through me, that he'd realized I wasn't as smart as my papers suggested, that I was a fraud who had no business being there. I spent the entire night rereading my last essay, searching for the fatal flaw, convinced my carefully constructed academic life was about to come crashing down. The next day, I knocked on his office door, my hand so clammy it was trembling. His office was a wonderful, chaotic mess of books stacked from floor to ceiling, spilling from shelves onto the floor and chairs. It smelled of old paper, dust, and strong coffee. It felt like the inside of a brain. He looked up from a book, his eyes peering at me over a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, and gestured for me to sit in the only clear chair. Kayla, he said, getting straight to the point in his typical no-nonsense manner. I've read all 3 of your papers this semester. They are exceptional. I stared at him, my mind blank. The word hung in the air, so alien in the context of my life that I couldn't process it. Not just well-researched, he continued, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. They are deeply insightful. There's a fire in your writing, a conviction. It's rare. I just nodded, unable to form words. It was the first time a person of authority had ever used a word like exceptional to describe me or my work. It felt like being struck by a gentle, welcome lightning. I notice you don't speak up in class, he continued, his gaze steady and unnervingly perceptive. And I've seen you working at the diner. I see you in the library late at night when I Leave? You have a drive that I don't see in many students, even the loudest ones. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. To be seen, truly seen in all my component parts, the student and the worker, the tired girl in the library, was such a foreign feeling it was overwhelming. The dam of my carefully maintained composure broke. I ended up telling him everything. Not in a dramatic, sobbing confession, but in the quiet, steady, matter-of-fact voice I used to narrate my life to myself. I told him about the 2-hour commute, the 3 jobs, the constant exhaustion, and the suffocating feeling of being on my own. He listened patiently, his expression never changing, his focus absolute. He didn't interrupt or offer platitudes. When I was done, a profound silence filled the small office. He just nodded slowly. "The world is full of people with talent, Kayla," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "Far fewer have your resilience. That is your superpower. Don't ever let anyone, including yourself, make you feel that it's a burden." That meeting changed everything. Dr. Weiss became my mentor, my secret ally. He saw the potential my parents had so carelessly overlooked. He didn't offer pity, he offered respect. And that was infinitely more valuable. I started going to his office hours regularly, not because I needed help, but just to talk about ideas. He'd recommend books that weren't on any syllabus, pushing me to think in new directions. He was the first adult in my life who seemed to believe my mind was a place worth investing in. During my senior year, he was the one who pushed me to think beyond my bachelor's degree. He told me about the Weiss Global Leadership Award, a competitive international fellowship he had founded years ago in his late wife's name. It was the university's most prestigious award, given to one graduating senior who had demonstrated exceptional leadership, academic excellence, and perseverance in the face of adversity. "You are the embodiment of what this award stands for," he told me bluntly one afternoon. "You should apply." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Dr. Weiss, I'm not a leader. I'm a dishwasher. Don't be glib," he said, his eyes sharp. "Leadership isn't about titles. It's about influencing your environment through your actions. You've led yourself out of a situation that would have broken most people. Apply." The thought was terrifying. It seemed too big, too grand for someone like me. But with Dr. Weiss's steady encouragement, I did it. I spent weeks on the application, working on it in stolen hours between shifts and classes. I wrote essays about my work, my studies, and my vision for using public policy to help people who, like me, were invisible. I did it all in secret. It was my project, my fragile hope, and I couldn't bear to have it touched by my family's casual dismissal. At the same time, Dr. Weiss urged me to apply for graduate school. "Don't stop now, Kayla," he said. "Your mind is just getting started." He helped me prepare an application for the master's program in public policy at New York University, one of the top programs in the country. I remember staring at the online application portal for hours, my cursor hovering over the submit button. The application fee alone was nearly a full day's wages at the diner. A wave of doubt washed over me. "Who are you kidding?" a voice in my head whispered. "You don't belong in a place like NYU." I almost closed the window, but then I remembered Dr. Weiss's voice. "Your resilience is your superpower." I took a deep breath and clicked submit. Again, I told my family nothing. My future was a secret garden I was cultivating, and I wouldn't let their shadows fall upon it. The acceptance letters came in the spring, just a few weeks apart. First, an email from NYU. I saw the subject line, "Your NYU application status," and my heart hammered against my ribs. I had to walk away from the library computer and take a few deep breaths before I could open it. I had been accepted. Not only that, but they were offering me a full-ride scholarship with a teaching assistantship that covered my living expenses. A full ride. The words seemed to float off the screen. I didn't have to worry about money. I could just be a student. I read the email 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. I had a future, a real future, in New York City. A future I had built for myself, out of nothing. A week later, a thick, formal envelope arrived from the university president's office. My hands shook as I opened it. I had been selected as the recipient of the Weiss Global Leadership Award. Sat in my tiny, cluttered room, holding the 2 letters in my hand. They felt heavy, real. These pieces of paper were proof. They were the validation I had spent my entire life craving, but they had come not from my family, but from the world. Outside, a world that had judged me on my own merits. They saw my struggle not as a failure, but as a strength. A plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not in the traditional sense. It was a plan for revelation. My family had never been interested in my journey, only in the destination. They wanted to show up at the finish line and take a picture, without ever knowing the brutal, lonely race I had run. My graduation was that finish line, and I decided, in that moment, that I would let them come. I would let them sit in the front row, and I would let them see, for the very first time, who their daughter really was. The phone call to invite them to my graduation was one of the hardest I've ever had to make. My hand hovered over my mom's contact information, my thumb trembling slightly. Part of me didn't want them there at all. I wanted my victory to be mine alone, untainted by their presence, their predictable, shallow pride. But another, stronger part of me knew this was necessary. This wasn't for them. It was for me. It was the closing of a chapter, the final scene in a play where I was finally in control of the lighting. I finally pressed the button. "Kayla! Hi, sweetie," my mom answered, her voice bright and cheerful, oblivious to the storm in my chest. "How are you?" "I'm good, Mom," I said, forcing my voice to be even and calm. "I'm calling because my graduation is in a few weeks. It's on May 20th. I was hoping you, Dad, and Jessica could come." There was a brief pause, filled with the static of my own anxiety. "Oh, of course. Graduation, right?" she said, as if remembering a minor appointment. "Let me check the calendar. I think Jessica has a weekend trip planned with her friends around then." "It's a Saturday," I said, my voice flat. "Oh, well, I'm sure she can move things around. We wouldn't miss it for the world," she said, her enthusiasm now kicking in. "We are so proud that you made it through. We have to admit, we were a little worried for a while there. You were never really the academic one, you know, more of a hard worker." The casual sting of her words was a familiar ache, but this time it didn't pierce me. It just fueled my resolve. This was exactly why this needed to happen. "It's going to be a special day," I said, a quiet emphasis on the word special. "I'd really like it if you could sit up front. I've reserved seats for you in the family section." "The front row? Oh, how wonderful," she chirped, her excitement growing now that there was a status symbol involved. "We'll have to get a great picture of you in your cap and gown. I'll tell your father. He'll be so pleased." The morning of graduation was overcast and humid, the air thick with the promise of a storm. I woke up feeling a strange, hollow sense of calm. The nervousness was there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a feeling of finality. I put on my simple black dress, and then the heavy graduation gown. It felt less like a costume and more like armor. My family arrived an hour before the ceremony, sweeping in with the chaotic energy of people who are the main characters in every story. They were dressed to the nines. My dad had his expensive DSLR camera slung around his neck, ready to capture the official-looking moments. My mom was wearing a floral dress and a wide-brimmed hat as if she were attending a garden party. Jessica, who had graduated the year before from her expensive private college, looked effortlessly glamorous in a designer jumpsuit, her expression one of faint, bored disdain as she surveyed the sprawling public university campus. "Wow, this is a big state school ceremony," she commented, a little too loudly to my mom. Mine was so much more intimate. You could actually hear the speeches. My dad clapped me on the shoulder, a big performative gesture for the benefit of other families standing nearby. "Well, kiddo, you did it. We're so proud of you for sticking it out. See, a little hard work never hurt anyone. Now that you've got this out of the way, you can get a nice stable job at an insurance company or something. Good benefits." They were playing their roles perfectly. The proud, supportive family, there to celebrate their underdog daughter's modest achievement. They had no idea they were walking into a theater where the play was about them. Just then, two of my friends, Sarah and Ben, rushed over. They were my library job friends, the ones who had shared their notes when I was sick and brought me coffee during my graveyard study sessions. "Kayla, you look amazing," Sarah squealed, giving me a huge hug. Ben grinned at me. "We're so proud of you. Seriously, you're a rock star." "I don't know how you did it all." I introduced them to my family. My parents smiled politely, the way you smile at waiters. "It's so nice that Kayla had friends here," my mom said, her tone implying surprise. "Kayla is literally the smartest person." "We know," Ben said earnestly to my dad. "The professors all love her." My dad just nodded, a blank expression on his face. "That's nice. She's always been a good worker." The disconnect was staggering. It was like they were speaking two different languages. My friends saw my mind and my spirit. My parents saw a workhorse. I handed them their tickets for the front row. I have to go line up with the other students now, I said, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere. I'll see you after. My mom gave me a quick air kiss that smelled of expensive perfume. Break a leg, sweetie, she said, her eyes already scanning the crowd for people she knew. Try not to trip on the stage. As I walked away, I heard my dad say to my mom, "She seems happy, doesn't she? It's good we pushed her to be independent. It really built character." I took my place in the long, snaking line of graduates. I saw Dr. Weiss standing with the other faculty members in their grand robes, and he gave me a small, conspiratorial nod. My friends found me in the line, and we huddled together, a small island of shared history in a sea of strangers. The ceremony began. The speeches droned on. I sat patiently, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. I watched my family in the front row. They looked restless. My dad checked his watch. Jessica was scrolling through her phone. My mom fanned herself with the program. They were just waiting for my 10 seconds of stage time so they could tick the box and go to lunch. They had no idea that the main event was yet to come. The announcer's voice echoed through the stadium, a monotonous drone that had been calling names for over an hour. Finally, I heard the names from my department getting closer. Jonathan Miller, Maria Gonzalez, Kayla Morgan. My moment. I stood up, and my legs felt like they were moving through water. The applause from the crowd was a gentle, impersonal wave of sound. I walked toward the stage, my eyes fixed on the dean. I dared a quick glance at my family in the front row. My dad raised his camera, a Pavlovian response. My mom gave a polite wave. Jessica offered a small, distracted smile before her eyes flickered back down to her phone. They were performing their duty, a duty that cost them nothing. I shook the dean's hand, accepted the empty diploma holder, and smiled for the obligatory photo. It was over in 10 seconds. I started to walk off the stage, just as hundreds of students had before me. I took 3 steps toward the stairs, my part in the play seemingly over, and then the dean's voice boomed from the microphone again, sharp and clear, stopping me in my tracks. "Ladies and gentlemen, could we have Kayla Morgan return to the podium for a moment?" A murmur went through the crowd, a ripple of curiosity. Heads lifted, phones were lowered. I turned back, my heart starting to pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. I walked slowly back to the center of the stage and stood beside the dean, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from shaking. The stadium lights felt intensely bright, hot on my face. The dean smiled warmly at me, a small, kind gesture of reassurance, before addressing the silent audience. Each year, this university honors students who have not only excelled academically, but have also demonstrated extraordinary character, integrity, and resilience. Today, we want to shine a special light on one such graduate. I could see my family in the front row. They had all leaned forward, their brows furrowed in a collective, confused frown. My dad's camera was lowered. Jessica had finally put her phone away, her face a mask of bewilderment. While managing a full course load and maintaining a 3.9 grade point average, the dean continued, his voice ringing with a deliberate, powerful authority. Kayla Morgan has worked 3 part-time jobs to fund her entire education without any financial support from her family. A wave of shocked, sharp applause rippled through the audience. It was different from the polite clapping before. This was applause of respect, of surprise. I risked another glance at my parents. Their smiles were gone, replaced by identical masks of stunned disbelief. Their faces were pale. The dean wasn't finished. She has worked as a dishwasher at the Greasy Spoon, a shelver in our own library stacks, and a retail associate on weekends. She has done this while commuting 2 hours each way, every single day. He let that sink in recognition of her incredible perseverance, her quiet leadership, her profound impact on our community, and her outstanding academic record. The university faculty and the Board of Trustees are proud to honor Kayla Morgan as this year's recipient of the Weiss Global Leadership Award. The applause was thunderous now, but it was what happened next that sealed the moment in time. The Jumbotron screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing a live feed of the podium, suddenly flickered to life with the video Dr. Weiss and I had secretly prepared. It began with a shot of me, sitting in the library late at night, my face pale with exhaustion but my eyes focused and determined. Dr. Weiss's voice, rich and resonant, narrated over the top. I first met Kayla not as a star, but as a quiet force. The video was a 2-minute montage of my hidden life. There was a grainy shot of my hands, red and chapped, plunged into a sink of soapy water at the diner. There was a time lapse of me, asleep on the early morning bus, my head against the vibrating window, a textbook open on my lap as the sun rose over the city. There was a short, powerful soundbite from Dr. Weiss. True leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about the will to keep going when no one is watching. There were photos of me volunteering at a local literacy center, laughing with a young child as we read a book together, a passion project no one in my family ever knew about. There were brief interview snippets with my other professors, my work-study supervisors, and my friends, all speaking about my dedication, my intellect, and my kindness. The video ended with a slow-motion shot of me walking across campus, looking not at the camera, but ahead, a small, determined smile on my face. As the quiet, resilient music swelled, text appeared on the screen, simple and stark. Kayla Morgan, B.A. in Political Science, summa cum laude, recipient of the Weiss Global Leadership Award. Next stop, New York University, master's program in Public Policy, with full funding. The final line hung on the screen as the video faded to black. The stadium erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping anymore. It was a roaring, sustained standing ovation. My fellow students, my professors, and thousands of strangers were on their feet, cheering for a story they had only just learned. They were cheering for the girl who had refused to give up. I stood on the stage, the sound washing over me, as tears streamed down my face. These were not tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of release, of vindication. It was the feeling of a secret, heavy world being brought into the light and finding it was not shameful, but honorable. Through the blur of my tears, I looked at the front row. My family was still seated, frozen amidst the standing, cheering crowd. They looked small, exposed, and utterly insignificant. My dad's camera was hanging limply from his neck. My mom's face was ashen. Jessica was staring at me, her mouth slightly agape, as if seeing a complete stranger. They were no longer the proud patrons of a modest success. They were the stunned, silent audience to a triumph they had no part in. For the first time in my life, I wasn't in their shadow. I was the one casting it. The standing ovation felt like it lasted an eternity, a wave of warmth and recognition that washed away years of feeling invisible. I stood on that stage, bathed in the applause of thousands of people, and it felt like the sun was finally shining directly on me. When the cheering eventually subsided and I walked off the stage, my diploma holder clutched in my hand. My friends mobbed me. Sarah and Ben and a half-dozen others engulfed me in a group hug, laughing and crying with me. "Oh my God, Kayla, that was epic," Ben shouted in my ear. For a few glorious minutes, I was lost in a sea of genuine happiness, surrounded by the people who had formed my true family over the past 4 years. When I finally made my way back toward the front row, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The crowd was beginning to disperse, but the air was still buzzing with what had happened. People were looking at me, then looking at my family, whispering and pointing. As I approached them, I saw a woman, the mother of one of Jessica's high school friends, a woman known for her gossip, lean over to my mom, her eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and predatory curiosity. "Lori, my goodness," the woman gushed, her voice carrying clearly. "We had no idea. 3 jobs and that NYU scholarship. You and Dawn must be absolutely bursting with pride. What an incredible, incredible young woman you raised. You kept her achievement so quiet." I watched my mother's face. The color had drained from it completely, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen. She managed a tight, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh yes," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. We always knew she had it in her. She's our little independent one." The excuse sounded pathetic and hollow, even to her own ears. My dad just stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, staring at the turf at his feet. He looked utterly lost, a man whose script had been ripped from his hands. Another parent, a man from my father's golf club, slapped him on the back. "Don, you old sandbagger. You never said a word about raising a genius. My kid's complaining about one part-time job. You must have taught her some serious work ethic." My dad just grunted. In response, unable to form words, Jessica was the first one to speak to me directly. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for clues to a puzzle she never knew existed. The usual confidence and casual dismissiveness were gone, replaced by a raw, naked confusion. "You never told us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of the departing crowd. "You never told us you were doing all of that." I looked at my sister, the golden child, the one whose life had been so easy and so celebrated, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of anger or jealousy. I just felt a quiet, sad distance from her. My life was a book she had never bothered to open. I replied with the simplest, truest words I had. My voice was not accusatory or angry. It was just a statement of fact. "You never asked." Her face crumpled slightly, as if I had struck her. Her eyes glistened. Because she knew it was true. They had never asked about my classes, my jobs, my struggles, my dreams. They had never shown the slightest curiosity about the life I was living just 2 hours away. I never told them because the topic of my actual life was never on the table. It was a foreign country to them, one they'd never even bothered to look for on a map. My dad finally found his voice, attempting to regain control. He tried to muster up some of his old paternal authority, but it came out weak and shaky. "Kayla, we should go and get some lunch. We need to celebrate all this." "Yes," my mom added quickly, her voice desperate, latching onto the idea of a normal family activity. "We've booked a table at that nice Italian place you like." As a family, they were trying to pull the narrative back, to stuff this enormous, public revelation back into a neat little family-sized box they could control. They wanted to smooth it all over with pasta and wine, to pretend they were still the proud parents celebrating their daughter, just as they had planned. But the script had been irrevocably changed, and we all knew it. The power had shifted, silently and completely. Just then, Dr. Weiss and a group of my professors and friends came up to me, their faces beaming with genuine pride. "Kayla, a few of us are all heading to a little cafe near campus to celebrate," Dr. Weiss said, placing a proud, fatherly hand on my shoulder. "You're the guest of honor, of course. No arguments." My family stood awkwardly to the side, suddenly and obviously outsiders in my own celebration. My dad cleared his throat, stepping forward, trying one last time to reclaim his role. "That's very kind of you, Professor," he said, forcing a smile. "But we're her family. We'll be taking her out to celebrate." This was the moment, the crossroads. One path led back to the old dynamic, to smoothing things over and pretending for the sake of a quiet lunch. The other path led forward, into my new life. I turned to my father. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list my grievances. I just spoke my truth, calmly and clearly, with the weight of 4 years of silence behind me. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm going with them." My mother looked horrified, as if I had slapped her. "Kayla, don't be ridiculous. We are your parents. We came all this way for you. You came to watch a graduation," I replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "But you were never here for the education. There's a difference." A heavy, painful silence fell over our little group. My parents stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock, hurt, and dawning comprehension. This was not their quiet, compliant daughter. This was a stranger. My dad made one last, desperate attempt, his voice laced with a false joviality that was painful to hear. "Honey, we always knew you'd do great things. We are so, so proud. We were just trying to teach you independence, that's all. A little tough love to make you strong." I almost laughed. It was the story they had told themselves for years, the one that absolved them of their neglect. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I finally had the power to reject the narrative they had written for me. "I did great things because you didn't believe." "In me?" I said, the words landing with a quiet finality, not shouted in anger but stated as fact. "You didn't teach me how to be independent. You taught me how to be alone. And in that loneliness, I learned how to believe in myself. So thank you for the lesson. It was a hard one, but I learned it, and I don't need it anymore." I looked at them, my father, my mother, my sister, and I saw them for what they were. Not monsters, but flawed, limited people who had failed to see the child right in front of them. And in that moment, all the bitterness and white-hot anger I had held onto for so long just dissolved. It was replaced by a sense of profound peace. I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need their apology. I just needed to be free. I turned away from their stunned faces and smiled at Dr. Weiss and my friends, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "I'd love to go to the cafe," I said. "Thank you." As I walked away, surrounded by the warmth and laughter of the people who had truly supported me, I didn't look back. I was leaving my family standing in the wreckage of the image they had so carefully constructed, and for the first time in my life, I felt no obligation whatsoever to help them clean it up. The celebration at the little cafe was everything my family lunches never were. It was loud, joyous, and filled with conversations that mattered. My friends told embarrassing stories about our late-night study sessions in the library basement. My professors talked to me not as a student, but as a future colleague, asking for my opinions on policy and theory. Dr. Weiss raised a glass of iced tea and gave a toast, not to my awards, but to what he called my unbreakable spirit and quiet dignity. I was surrounded by people who saw all of me, not just the parts that were convenient for them. I laughed so hard my sides hurt, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I didn't check my phone once. I knew it would be filled with a cascade of missed calls and increasingly frantic texts from my parents, and I simply didn't have the space for their panic. My independence, which they had once used as a convenient excuse for their neglect, was now my reality, a boundary I was finally strong enough to enforce. That fall, I moved to New York. I found a tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn with a window that looked out onto a brick wall, and it felt like a palace. It was mine. Every book on the cheap IKEA shelf, every mismatched cup in the kitchen, it was all paid for by my own hard work. The city was vast and anonymous, a place where I could finally define myself on my own terms, free from the crushing weight of my family's history and their expectations. I threw myself into my studies. The work was demanding, more challenging than anything I had ever done, but it was a thrill. I was in seminars with brilliant, passionate people from all over the world. In one of my first classes, I got into a lively debate with my professor about urban policy. I spoke up, my voice clear and confident, and he listened, challenged me, and respected my argument. Afterward, he told me it was a brilliant point. I walked out of that classroom feeling 10 feet tall. I was no longer the quiet one or the forgotten one. I was just Kayla, a graduate student with ideas worth hearing. I made new friends, people who knew nothing of my past, who liked me for who I was in the present. I spent weekends exploring museums and neighborhoods, feeling the city's electric energy seep into my bones, rebuilding me from the inside out. There were a few awkward attempts at contact from my family, a stilted phone call from my dad a few weeks after I moved, where he talked about the weather and his golf game before asking if I needed anything, a question so comically late it was almost laughable. I politely said I was fine. Jessica sent me a text asking for advice on a paper she was writing, a transparent attempt to act as if nothing had happened. I gave her some brief, clinical advice and left it at that. They were trying to tiptoe back into my life without ever acknowledging the earthquake that had happened. Then, a few months after I moved, just before Christmas, an email from my mom appeared in my inbox. My finger hovered over the delete button, a conditioned reflex, but something made me open it. The subject line just said, Kayla. The email was long and rambling, a river of consciousness filled with her familiar brand of self-serving justifications. It started with excuses, how they were so focused on Jessica's more obvious needs, how they thought I was doing fine, how they just didn't realize how hard it was for me. But then, about halfway through, the tone shifted. The defensiveness fell away, replaced by something that sounded like genuine raw regret. The day of your graduation, she wrote, when I sat there and watched that video, when I heard what you had accomplished all by yourself, I didn't feel pride at first. I felt a profound, terrible sense of shame. We weren't there for you, Kayla. We were there for the photo op. We celebrated the victories we could easily see and post on Facebook, and we ignored the ones you had to fight for in silence, alone. We failed you. It's a simple, ugly truth, but it's the truth. You deserved better. You deserved parents who saw your light, not just your sisters. I know sorry is not enough, but I am so, so sorry. I read the email several times. A few years ago, those words would have been everything I ever wanted to hear. They would have been a healing balm on a raw, open wound. I would have cried and called her immediately, but now they felt distant. The wound had already scarred over, healed, not by their apology, but by my own efforts. Her apology, I realized, was for her. It was her attempt to find peace. I thought about what to write back for a long time. An angry reply felt pointless and exhausting. A simple, I forgive you, felt dishonest. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip for her convenience. It was a long, quiet process that was happening inside of me, for me. Finally, I wrote back a few simple, honest lines. Hi, Mom. Thank you for the email. I appreciate you writing it. I've moved forward and built a life here that I'm very proud of. I hope you can all find a way to move forward too. The door isn't closed, but things are different now. My life is here. You can catch up if you want. To grow too. I hit send and felt a final, quiet click inside me, like a lock settling into place. I had forgiven them, not by forgetting the past or absolving them, but by accepting it for what it was, and refusing to let it define my future. My peace was no longer dependent on their validation or their remorse. My worth was not up for their discussion. It was a fact I had established on my own, in diners and libraries and on late-night bus rides. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the endless grid of city lights. I was no longer the backup plan, the forgotten child, the sensible daughter. I was the architect of my own life. The loudest moment of my story wasn't the applause in the stadium. It was the quiet hum of my own, peaceful, independent life. And it was a sound I had finally learned to love. Did your family ever treat you like the backup plan while giving everything to someone else? If you've ever been the forgotten child who still rose anyway, this story is yours. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones we achieve in silence, for ourselves. The greatest form of justice isn't getting even, it's getting free. And freedom is a peace they can never take away from you.